Hey, everybody, welcome back. It's Tuesday, January 14th, 2025, and here we are just 14 days into the new year, and already we've got so much to cover. From intense cold and snow gripping much of the country to some really serious wildfire risks out west, there's no shortage of weather events to talk about, so grab a coffee, settle in, and let's break it all down. Let's start with the most pressing issue. The fire situation in Southern California. If you've been following the news, you know it's been a rough couple of weeks out there, and unfortunately, things are about to get worse. A new weather system is moving down from the Pacific Northwest, and it's going to create a big trough over the western U.S. This trough is the key player. It's setting the stage for strong Santa Ana winds, which are known for fanning the flames of wildfires. For those of you who might not be familiar, Santa Ana winds are these incredibly dry, powerful winds that sweep down from the mountains into Southern California. They're notorious for turning small fires into massive infernos. As the air descends over the mountains and through the canyons, it heats up and loses what little moisture it has left.
Yeah.
Combine that with gusts that can reach 50 to 70 miles per hour, and you've got a recipe for disaster. But before we get into the details, hit the subscribe button, like this video, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for your support. Let's talk specifics. The areas most at risk include Los Angeles, Long Beach, Riverside, San Diego, and pretty much everywhere in between. We're talking about extremely critical fire conditions today, and they're not going away anytime soon. Wednesday will bring more of the same, and by Thursday, while we might see a slight improvement, the overall risk will still be high. Humidity levels in these areas are going to drop to around 10, which is bone dry. When you pair that with these intense winds, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire. And the thing about these winds is that they don't just fan the flames. They can actually cause fires to jump roads and rivers, spreading them to new areas and in a matter of minutes. The National Weather Service has issued a PDS red flag warning that stands for particularly dangerous situation. These warnings aren't issued lightly. They're reserved for the most severe fire weather conditions. If you're in any of the affected areas, please take this seriously. Have an evacuation plan in place, know your routes, and stay tuned to local alerts. And here's the fun. Even though some of the fires that started last week are now under control, all it takes is one spark to start the cycle all over again. A downed power line, a careless mistake, or even something as simple as a car's hot exhaust pipe touching dry grass. Any of these could ignite a new fire. And with these conditions, that fire could spread faster than you can imagine. Now, I know this sounds scary, and it is a serious situation, but the best thing you can do is be prepared. Check on your neighbors, especially if they're elderly or have mobility issues, and make sure they have a plan too. This is going to be a tough week for Southern California, and my thoughts are with everyone out there. All right, now let's shift gears and talk about the rest of the country, because while the fires are a localized issue, the rest of the U.S. is gearing up for a major cold snap that's going to affect millions of people. What we're looking at is one of the most significant January patterns we've seen in years. A massive trough is forming over the continental U.S., and it's going to pull down Arctic air, blanketing much of the central and eastern U.S., with temperatures far below average. Now, before we dive into the cold, let me talk about a brief warm-up that's coming for parts of the central U.S., the Pacific Northwest, and even western Canada. Over the next couple of days, some areas might see temperatures 20 to 30 degrees above average. For example, southern Minnesota and Iowa could have a day or two where it feels almost spring-like. But don't let it fool you. It's a short-lived reprieve. By the 19th or 20th, that Arctic air is going to come roaring in, and when it does, it's going to stay for a while. The GF Ensemble models, which are basically a collection of different weather model runs averaged together, are showing incredible agreement on this. When you see this kind of consistency, it's a strong signal that we're about to experience something big. From January 19th through the 24th, the majority of the U.S. is going to be dealing with temperatures well below average. The only areas that might escape the cold are Maine, southern Florida, Alaska, and Hawaii. And you know what happens when you get a pattern like this? Snowstorms, lots of them. The Climate Prediction Center is already highlighting a large area with a 2040 chance of heavy snow between January 18th and 24th. This includes parts of the South, the Midwest, and the Northeast. But here's a word of caution. As we start to see social media light up with talk of historic blizzards or the storm of the century, don't buy into the hype just yet. Long-range forecasts are great for identifying general patterns, but when it comes to specific storms, anything beyond 5 days is still pretty speculative. So let's focus on the overall trend for now. Speaking of trends, let's talk about snowfall so far this winter. If you're in the Northeast or parts of the South, you've probably already seen more snow than usual. But if you're in areas like Iowa, South Dakota, or Nebraska, you might feel like you've been in a snow drought, and honestly, you're not wrong. The upcoming pattern doesn't favor much snow for those areas either. Meanwhile, places like Arkansas, Oklahoma, and even parts of Texas have been seeing snow in areas that typically don't get much. Most of the U.S. is enjoying relatively mild and uneventful weather. However, there is an area of moisture moving up from the Gulf of Mexico that's beginning to stir things up along the Gulf Coast. If you're in places like Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, or Florida, you're likely to see scattered showers and maybe even some isolated thunderstorms over the next couple of days. It's nothing too severe, but it could create some localized flooding in low-lying areas, so it's worth keeping an eye on if you're out and about. Meanwhile, up in the Midwest and Northeast, winter is still holding strong. A recent snow event dropped several inches of snow across parts of these regions, and the effects aren't quite done yet. Lake effect snow is the big story today, especially around Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. For those of you in Buffalo, Syracuse, or nearby towns, get ready for continued snowfall throughout the day. Lake effect snow is driven by cold air sweeping over the relatively warmer waters of the Great Lakes, and it can create some impressive snow totals in a short amount of time. In fact, areas near Lake Ontario are gearing up for potentially 20 to 30 inches of snow in the hardest hit spots. If you've got travel plans in these areas, you might want to rethink them because conditions are going to be tough. Out on the West Coast, things are quieter in terms of weather, but unfortunately, wildfires are still a serious issue, particularly in Southern California near Los Angeles. Strong winds and extremely dry conditions have created a perfect storm for fires to spread, and the situation is expected to remain critical for the next couple of days. The good news is that later this week, we're expecting a shift in the weather pattern that should bring some relief. Winds will die down, and moisture levels will increase, making it harder for fires to thrive. Until then, though, the risk remains high, so if you're in those areas, stay vigilant and follow any evacuation orders. Now, let's talk about what's coming, because this weekend marks the start of a significant weather shift. The jet stream, which is like the conveyor belt for weather systems in the atmosphere, is about to undergo a major transformation. Right now, it's relatively flat with a westerly flow dominating much of the country. This setup is allowing for some warmer air to creep into the Midwest and Ohio Valley, which is a nice break from the colder than usual January weather we've been dealing with. By Thursday and Friday, many areas in these regions will see above average temperatures. It's a brief taste of spring in the middle of winter, but don't get too comfortable because everything changes by the weekend. By Saturday, the jet stream is going to take a dramatic dive southward, dragging with it a surge of Arctic air from Canada. This is where things start to get really intense. The polar jet stream, which has been sitting far to the north, is going to dip deep into the U.S., bringing bitterly cold temperatures to much of the country. The first places to feel the chill will be the Great Plains and Midwest, but it won't stop there. This Arctic air will continue its march eastward, eventually impacting the Ohio Valley northeast and even parts of the southeast. Temperatures are going to plummet well below average, and in some places, it could be the coldest air of the season so far. Let me paint you a picture of just how cold it's going to get. By Saturday night, areas in the northern plains could see temperatures as low as 20 to 25 def, and that's before factoring in the wind chill. With the wind, it could feel like 60 def in some spots, which is just brutal. Frostbite becomes a real concern at these levels, so if you're planning to be outside, make sure you're taking all the necessary precautions. The cold air will spread across the Midwest and Ohio Valley on Sunday and Monday, bringing sub-zero temperatures to many areas. Even parts of the southeast, including places as far south as Houston and the Florida Panhandle, could see freezing conditions. Now let's shift gears and talk about the snow, because this Arctic blast isn't coming alone. There's a strong likelihood of multiple winter storms developing in the days ahead. The first storm is expected to take shape over the weekend, starting in the Midwest and Ohio Valley. While it's still too early to nail down exact snow totals, early models suggest that some areas could see light to moderate snowfall, with pockets of heavier snow possible. By late Saturday night, the snow will begin spreading eastward into the Northeast and Great Lakes region. If you've got travel plans this weekend, you'll definitely want to stay updated because road conditions could get tricky fast. But wait, there's more. A second winter storm could develop early next week, following a more southern track. This one has the potential to bring snow to areas that don't typically see much, including parts of the Gulf Coast, Southeast, and even the Carolinas. Again, it's too early to say for sure, but the possibility is there, and it's something we'll be watching closely in the days to come. If the storm materializes, it could add to the already significant winter weather impacts across the country. Even if you're not in the path of a winter storm, the cold itself is going to be a major factor. By Monday morning, actual temperatures in the northern plains could be as low as 25 def, with many areas in the Midwest and Ohio Valley hovering near or below 0 def. The freezing line could extend all the way down to the Gulf Coast, which is pretty remarkable for this time of year. And the wind chills, they'll make it feel even colder. In parts of the northern plains and Midwest, wind chills could dip to 30 def or lower, and in some places it could feel like, 60 def. These are dangerous conditions, so make sure you're prepared. Before we wrap up, I want to emphasize that this is still a developing situation. The models have been consistent in showing this Arctic blast and the potential for snow, but things can always change as we get closer to the event. That's why it's so important to stay informed. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and have notifications turned on so you don't miss any updates. I'll be keeping a close eye on everything and will bring you the latest information as it becomes available. So there you have it, a massive Arctic blast, dangerously cold temperatures, and the potential for multiple winter storms all in the span of the next 10 days. It's going to be a wild ride, so make sure you're ready. Thanks for tuning in. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.